I'll bring the meeting to order. Welcome to the extraordinary meeting of the Town Council of Tuesday the 6th of June for 8 p.m. and I'll make you aware of the fact that we are recording the meeting. And the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. It appears we have nobody absent, and therefore there is no need to accept any apologies for absence. Moving on to declarations of interests. To receive and consider any declarations of interest from members and officers under Section 50 of the Local Government Act 2000, Standing Order 35. This requirement applies only in respect of matters which are to be considered by the Council at this meeting. And the first of the declarations is to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests.
Is that us then? If we live in Oundle? Is that the one if we live in Oundle?
It seems to me that if your property is directly affected, then you should potentially disclose to do that. However, that might bring you to the point at which you might then start wondering about requesting a dispensation, because clearly you could end up in a silly position if you're not careful.
I think it's an other interest if you've got a property.
Other interest, then, okay, that's fine.
So, does anybody have
Sorry, I was going on to the other interest, and I've got an interest, obviously.
Nobody's got a disclosable pecuniary interest then. We move on to declare any other interests. Councillor Peel.
Well, I've got one, because obviously one of the new, or possible new developments is right next to where I live. So obviously I have to disclose that fact, don't I?
You do?
Like I say, mate, the tricky bit is that, I mean, I don't know whether I'm going to be affected, and whether where I live and where my wife lives is going to be affected by what comes out, because we haven't seen it yet. We only have seen a draft. We've not seen the final bit. I'm quite happy to declare an interest and say, look, I declare an interest as a resident.
I think the safest is to declare if you think there's any doubt whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go down the route.
Councillor Chesser.
Well, we have discussed this before, and as an example, my own position, and the decision was that I wasn't sufficiently, and therefore I think the same applies to most of us. Unless you live next door to one of the proposed developments, one is not really needing to declare an interest.
I agree with that.
Well, yeah, well, we've
had that various discussion. Let's not have to have it again.
No, I'm just going safety first here.
Yeah.
Well, I do live next door to one of the...
I thought the monitoring officer at an earlier meeting had suggested that we ought to declare if there was any likelihood, any possibility of...
That's correct, yeah. So that's the other interest. It's a pecuniary if you are next to where you may have to think about dispensations or leaving the room. But if you've got a property within Oundle, it's suggested that you should declare an interest.
Well, that's what I've just said, effectively.
Stick around like that, that's all of us.
That's not
Only the Mayor and Councillor Chapel have not.
Yes.
That's correct. Everybody else has to declare.
Well,
other
that's the point
interest.
I was trying to make. I'd rather go safety first than declare an interest as a resident and a councillor.
Sound resident, so safe.
Can you put me down on
Council Appeal has, you have more than that, don't
Well,
you?
yeah,
Next
one of the
to it.
developments is going to be basically by the side of...
It's probably safest if Councillor Peel absents himself. We
Absolutely.
talk about that specific one,
Well,
but
yeah,
nothing
exactly.
else.
I was going to anyway, that's why I thought I'd go.
Because he has to fall into the same position as you were in St.
They were
Peter's,
covered.
don't we?
Potentially. I would declare another interest on the basis that I'm a member of the Neighbourhood Plan Group in Clapthorne, which of course borders this parish.
Has the clerk got all of those? Lovely. To consider any requests for dispensation? No. To report any gifts or hospitality accepted over the value of £50?
No.
To report any inappropriate gifts or hospitality offered? No. Jolly good. Right. for the next item on the agenda, the draft neighbourhood plan, of which there are 4 sections to it. I'm going to hand over to our head of planning, Councillor Chappell, to take you through these proposals.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Simply by way of sort of starting off, the draft that has emerged comes about after an extremely lengthy process, which has gone through a number of different stages, like a sort of larva and moving on through its various forms till it becomes a butterfly or whatever they do. In this case, the formal part of it started with the setting up of a neighbourhood plan working party, which comprised elected councillors, not all, a certain number of elected councillors, and 9 parishioners. And its constitution was set up that it was going to be chaired by a non-councillor and the vice chair would be a councillor. And it was chaired for effectively the whole of its life by Roger Sturman. And this continued up till 2015. In 2015, following advice from Sean Matthews at ENC, the working of that working party was suspended. The working party had, in fact, operated through a number of fairly small groups, one dealing with housing, another with green space, another with business, and so on. All of those groups stopped, and a process was gone through to review the work that they had done to see if there was any risk to the plan from the way in which those things have been looked at. Observations were made by some outside people with regard to that, which were taken on board, and a new system was set up whereby the council developed what it called a scrutiny committee. Membership of the various working parties effectively swapped around so that various people who were doing one thing started doing something else. And each group was then asked to come back to full council and present what they had to present. That process started at the tail end of 2015 and went into 2016. And as we all know, in 2016, in February, a large number of councillors left the council, and those 5 that were then left were approached by Neil Fraser, who is a former councillor and was a member of the original working party and had been involved in the housing group, who said, look, bearing in mind there's only 5 of you and you're going to be struggling to keep your heads above water with everything else, we don't want the neighbourhood plan to grind to a halt. Essentially, can we, the sort of people who are not on the council, keep working on this to take it forward? That seemed like a sensible idea. Council agreed it, and that's what happened. And this group then worked away very rapidly in consultation with James Wilson, an independent consultant who was being funded by the town council. And he started to go through all of the background evidence and material that the group had put together and all of the draft work that had been done on the plan to help them reach this stage. And it's that group that has presented this to us, which is a document largely drafted by James Wilson. That was presented to the council. We had a special meeting of the council a little bit earlier in the year when we were invited to agree the plan. as it then was. And we took a view that we really hadn't had long enough to look at it, and that it should go off to the planning committee to have a look at it and then bring it back to full council when they felt that they were ready to do that. Essentially then, the matter was then left with the planning committee. I invited anybody who wanted to submit comments, questions or anything else to contact me. And I went through the original draft more in a sort of proofreading mode than anything else, and went back to Councillor Stern after a while and said, here's a variety of minor corrections and amendments, here's one or two questions, and in the pack that you've all had for tonight, you've got a copy of that original document. Councillor Stern looked at that and was perfectly happy with, as it were, all the minor corrections and amendments. In relation to the questions that were being posed, he took a view that we should await the NP's assessment of the draft plan before we sort of took those aspects further. The matter then came through the planning committee, who looked at each individual policy within the draft and produced a shorter document, again it's in your pack, raising sort of 8 specific points with regard to specific policies. And that was kind of the observations of the planning committee. Quite a number of people who sit around this table took part in that exercise. But it seems to me that as a matter of logic, the full council should now undergo essentially the same exercise. Hopefully it may be a matter that we can go through reasonably quickly, because a number of us have already looked at it. But quite importantly, several people around this table have not looked at it in that way or taken part in that process. When we have got to the end of going through this, we may get to a point where, in principle, we approve the draft in terms of the broad thrust of all the policies, etc. If that's the case, then we're going to be in a position to start trying to move things on. The NP's situation, again, I think there's some material in the pack. I don't know whether there's any update yet on things.
There's been an update since you've had everything.
Right. One of the problems that we found was we were being told originally it might cost £500, possibly as much as £1,000 to go through this NP's review. Then we went to them and they said 10 days at £350, which even I could work out is rather a bit more than 500 quid. At which point we decided to make some wider inquiries to see whether anything could be done. And rather than me say anything at this point, perhaps it's easier if our clerk brings you up to speed on that.
I've had a second quote, and this quote is for, he's actually separated out to look at the plan. He said it'd be 2,100, and to include the design statement as well would be another £1,400. So it literally comes out just about the same.
Right. Well, doubtless we'll come back to that issue at some point, but our process tonight is to simply go through and look at the first draft. So literally, let's have a crack at doing that. Now, the document, as I say, contains all sorts of information and background. You've all had plenty of opportunity to look at it, and I'm not going to comment, as it were, on anything other than policies, apart from the objective, which is set out at the beginning. But of course, if anybody actually, having gone through it, wants to raise any other issues, now's the time to do it. The one issue the planning committee picked up on was that there's a reference on page 6 about community consultation, and in its original form it's so sparse as to be not worth including. Indeed, it's positively misleading as it appears at the moment, because there's been far more consultation than that part of the form shows. So when this draft moves on to another iteration, either all of the material wants to go there, or a better précis with the remaining information in some form of appendix, or it all goes into an appendix. But certainly I wouldn't want it to appear as it does now, because it makes it look as if there's been a minimal amount of consultation. There will be further consultation as part of this process. It'll be seems to me in two forms. There's the statutory consultation bit. This is the whole Regulation 14 consultation, which is a formal 6-week period of consultation where the plan is published and Uncle Tom Cobley and all can come along and say that what they like and dislike about it. But prior to that, because the public hasn't seen anything very much apart from a brief presentation at the annual town meeting 13 months ago, there's going to be a need to have some form of consultations type or promotion event. What I'd like to do, in a sense, is when we get on to the last item, to consider whether to use consultant services to progress the neighbourhood plan. As part of that sort of wide discussion, we might look at where we're going, assuming, of course, that we haven't founded on the rocks prior to that. So, the document contains a vision. It's been a long-standing vision. I seem to recall it being bandied around several years ago, and it would seem inappropriate to suddenly start tinkering with it now. So whether you like it or not, I think we're going to have to say we're stuck with it. But it actually is quite an important thing to say, and it's this: that our vision is that Oundle remains a stunningly beautiful, thriving market town, renowned for being a fantastic place to live and to work, and a joy to visit. So that's kind of the vision that the plan is intended to produce.
A simple
Councillor
matter that if you tell us the page number, we can get there.
Yeah, that is page 6.
So,
16.
Did I say 6? It's 16.
16.
Yeah, you're quite right. Actually, it says page 6, and no, that's what threw me. Right. My own document has a typing error in it. It's not very helpful. Right, the very first policy, as far as I can see, relates to town centre and retail. And it says this: within the defined shopping frontages set out in the town centre proposals plan, there will be a presumption to retain retail uses unless it can be demonstrated that the proposal will add to the attractiveness of the town centre and not critically undermine the predominance of retail on these streets. Continues by saying this: town centre uses will be supported within the defined town centre area, subject to this being of a scale and nature consistent with the character of Oundle Town Centre, and that proposals do not individually or cumulatively undermine the focus of retail development. Any external development should accord with the guidance set out in the Oundle Design Statement and Shopfront Design Supplementary Planning Document. And finally, town centre uses outside of the town centre area will require a sequential and impact test as required by the National Planning Policy Framework to demonstrate the proposal will not impact on the town centre's role and function. So, various elements to it. First of all, the concept of defined shopping frontages is not new. It's been around for donkey's years. There is currently a defined shopping frontage in the town. What this says is that the presumption is that within what is the existing area, the presumption is in favour of retaining retail uses. There. Councillor Chester.
I don't like the first sentence. I didn't when I first read it, because it's almost suggesting that actually we may well lose those frontages. I think that should be the last resort, not the first resort.
I think we brought that up, didn't we, in the last time we said the
Yes,
presumption bit.
Yeah. The wording that's used in there, unfortunately, largely echoes wording in the Joint Core Strategy document that is now an adopted document. And this document is subsidiary to that. If this document is in conflict with the JCS or with the National Planning Policy Framework, it will not get past ENC, and even if somehow it's scraped past them, it wouldn't get past the inspector. So to some extent, the language of some sections is kind of almost chosen for us. And certainly the language that is around there, and the point about presumption to retain retail uses unless, is very much part of that. I mean, it is supporting retail use, but it is making it clear, because it has to, that we can't kind of wrap it up in aspic and say, look, under no circumstances can something that's retail stop being retail.
I agree with that, but it's still the way in which that's the first sentence, rather than the last. I'm not saying we shouldn't have it said.
So are you suggesting that simply one either reverses the order in which these things appear, or that we take the second bit first and the first bit
Yeah, I
second?
think so.
Yeah.
Well, it would certainly be easy enough to move it around, and that's certainly not going to cause any great problems.
There's nothing wrong with the second statement.
Again, it mirrors the JCS. Obviously, the last statement links to the design statement document, which we've also got on the agenda tonight. The shopfront design supplementary planning document is an ENC document, again, which we are effectively bound by as being the planning authority's supplementary guidance in that area. I note that when it was before planning, there was concern about whether what was in there was robust enough, and therefore it had been suggested that we might like to meet with James Wilson to see whether there is some way of beefing it up whilst not losing compliance with NBPF and JCS. And I'm sorry for all these initials, but it's a hell of a sight quicker than saying the whole thing. Which again links rather to this last item, which talks about whether to continue to use the consultant, because of course you will see that planning has said, maybe we should raise this with the consultant, because the feeling there was that if it could be beefed up, it should be. I suspect that the planning committee is pushing it a bit of an open door there, because I imagine that other councillors will probably take a similar view, that if it could be strengthened, it would be nice. But whether it can go much further than that, I have to say, unfortunately, considerable doubts.
Can I,
What's the appeal?
I've actually read the report now, I want to say, you know.
I'm relieved to hear it.
No, can I go on to the sort of points that I've picked out in the draft report? Is that okay? Because obviously you're going through a certain thing.
What I want to do really is try and take it policy by policy. If you've got something on the specific policy that is under discussion.
Not on that particular policy, no, I've got things on housing and
okay, can we,
roads.
in order to try and keep this
I think we've got to do it your way.
under control, and I can just see how it could dot about if individual councillors pick up various points. So if we go through it policy by policy, if doing that results in something that any councillor wants to say about something more general, they don't seem to get an opportunity. You'll get an opportunity at the end, because we'll make sure that anything and everything else is discussed. But I think it's easier to go through it policy by policy. Hopefully some of them will be relatively quick, because hopefully they will not be that controversial. And I am only really looking at policies rather than the rest of it. But as I say, we can look at other aspects if we need to. The second policy that appears in here is OC1, which is the Oundle School Master Plan, and says this: proposals to enhance sports facilities at Oundle School's Milton Road site as part of the Sports Master Plan, including the provision of a sports hall and swimming pool, and make them accessible to the wider public, will be supported. Clearly, the Oundle School Sports Master Plan has been coming in and out of the planning committee for probably the best part of the last couple of years anyway, with various aspects of it being brought forward and dealt with. And indeed, they've included the provision of the sports hall and the swimming pool. So on one level, to some degree, there are aspects of this which are already out of date, and it's one of the problems of trying to do any plan like this, because it takes so long that certain things happen and you keep constantly having to revise it. Obviously, the wider point about this is making the things accessible to the wider community. That probably can be in here. Arguably, it might be said that this is more of a community planning issue than a neighbourhood plan issue, because neighbourhood plan issues are primarily a planning issue, but we're open to guidance around whether or not you can incorporate something like that. I'm sure that none of us would demur from the fact that we would support the opening up of Oundle School facilities to the widest possible audience in the town. So I'm not sure there's a lot more that could be said about that. Again, we'd sort of flagged it up in planning as maybe we should be talking to James about it, or it might emerge from the NPS process. OC2 is enhancement and protection of community facilities. Proposals will be encouraged for new and or improved community facilities, which are defined subsequently, provided that the facility is appropriate to its location, having regard to its use, size and design, impact on traffic, the environment and neighbouring uses. Facility must be accessible by foot and cycle and other non-motorised users. The mind actually boggles slightly as to what's envisaged by that, but in a sort of canoe or something where suitable. The loss of existing community facilities and any future assets of community value will be resisted unless it can be shown that the facilities are no longer viable or where acceptable alternative provision exists or is proposed. The wording of that, again, does largely mirror the joint core strategy wording in that kind of area, and it doesn't strike me that as a broad wish list that we probably have any issue with that either. That moves us.
Is that, are we talking about health and well-being?
That was more on community facilities, and the next one I've got is on the cycle routes. I don't think we've quite got to that one yet. Cycle routes. In developing this plan, we have gone very much further than some have tried to do, which is to try to go to prospective developers and say, what we want with you is a partnership. You want to use land to develop, so you want us to include your land as an allocated site for a level of development. We want something quite apart from things like 106 or SIL money or anything else. We have a vision that we want to deliver, and there are certain things we are lacking, and we'll see aspects of that later on. But one of the things that was decided very early on in the process was that it would be great if there was a cycle/footpath network that enabled people to move around the town more easily, both for leisure and fitness issues and otherwise. And so there is a whole circular cycle/pedestrian route developed. The various linkages are all set out in OCR 1, and the key phrases at the bottom, allocated development sites for housing, will be required to provide land for access and contributions to facilitate the delivery of that system. And I think it's fair to say that even, for example, on a site that would be developed by Persimmon off St Christopher's Drive / Ashton Road, where nothing else is basically on offer, they do participate in that and provide land for that purpose. Again, I wouldn't have thought that anybody's going to demur from the sentiment, but perhaps the detail, Councillor Fuller.
No, it's just the general point. It's not a criticism of this at all, but I do know that people in Fotheringay are concerned about not what we're doing, but the impact it will have on developments in their part of the world, because it seems that word's got out amongst the builders, etc., the developers, and so there's issues about that affect them. So this is causing an impact on the surrounding countryside or areas. That's what I wanted to say. So I feel it's very good that we're doing it.
I wasn't specifically aware of that. What I can say, wearing a second hat, is that Blackthorn have been absolutely desperate to see a draft of our plan for some time.
Yes, I know.
And we have consistently said, well, we can't let you have a draft of it until such time as it's been through the full council process and hopefully been approved. What we did say to Blackthorn was that once that happened, yes, they could have a copy of it. Not only could they have a copy of it, but all the neighbouring parishes would get a copy of it very early and would be involved throughout the remaining stages of sort of the consultation process, both formal and informal, because it's very important we take them with us. Councillor Oates.
Why are they so concerned about
Blackthorn's concern is this, their call for sites, coupled with the fact that East Northants Council did a call for sites for their Part 2 local plan, which is to replace the Rural North Oundle and Thrapston plan, it's effectively the update, generated, rather as ours did, an enormous number of developers wanting to build. In our case, if we were looking potentially at around 250 to 300, which will be a subject we'll come on to later, but driven by the need to be compliant with the JCS minimum requirements as a minimum, we found that we were getting roughly 4 houses proposed for every one that we were likely to allocate. The proportion in Blackthorn is even more dramatically worse than that. There are a number of very big developments planned, I use that term loosely, in the Blackthorn parish, which is a lot bigger than Blackthorn village. Blackthorn parish bumps up to Oundle. The very last development in Oundle heading out towards Blackthorn on the left-hand side is in fact not in Oundle. It is already in Blackthorn parish. There's a minor plan to extend that. If you go out down the Cotterstock Road, there is land on the left-hand side as you're driving out of town, which is owned by Charles Lane, which he is putting forward for development in the Blackthorn parish. And on the other side of the road, there is land owned by John Richardson. He engaged a company called Provision, who came forward with a plan to develop houses both on the Oundle side of the border, as it were, and the Blackthorn side. 140 in Oundle parish, 60 in Blackthorn parish, total of 200. 200 is a figure which ENC recognised in our NOTP as being the possible development potential of that whole site. But even beyond that, on the old, if you go out towards Cotterstock, on the right-hand side, you pass the kind of what I'll call the ruined buildings, where there's the mast and so on, which front the road, and if you go further back, you end up in the sewage farm, which I think we're supposed to now call a water treatment facility. And Mr. Richardson has intimated that he'd like to develop that land. Now, all of this land that lies in Blackthorn parish is remote from the current built environment of Blackthorn and isn't going to impact on Blackthorn village other than to increase their precept rate enormously, but would impact hugely on Oundle. So, quite rightly, Blackthorn basically came to Oundle and said, well, what's your view about all of this? And we've made it very clear to them, as best we could without getting to the point of showing them this, that we don't need development there to meet the requirement for housing in the Oundle area at all. And that actually we really wouldn't welcome it. Glapthorne has just gone through a particular phase of their plan whereby last Saturday they held a public exhibition in their village hall at which the various people putting forward sites for development were able to come along and put up displays about what they planned, and the neighbourhood plan group put up all sorts of information about what they had put in their very provisional drafts and were seeking feedback. That followed a meeting 2 days earlier at which developers were actually able to address a public meeting which largely packed out the village hall. I know it packed out the village hall because Councillor Sparks tried to get in and he took one look at it, gave up and went away again. It was very full. Interestingly enough, Provision turned up on the Thursday to speak, and the same lady turned up, I think she's based in Winchester, so she had a long trip, on the Saturday. Mr. Richardson, however, contributed nothing to either event. He didn't come to talk to the village on Thursday. He didn't supply any information or anybody to attend the event on the Saturday. He also has another site actually within the village, and he did exactly the same with that. But the point is that Glapthorne was concerned that their plan should not adversely impact upon ours or potentially vice versa, so they've been quite keen to liaise. It's fair to say that their provisional plan says that none of the developments that are on the border with Oundle but remote from the current built environment from Glapthorne, they don't support any of it. And that is likely to be confirmed, but that's certainly what was on the public display board, so I'm not sort of disclosing any confidences I shouldn't. They publicly stated they do not favour these things. They've been trying to get back feedback, and there will be a meeting later in the month at which they will disclose what that public feedback was after a second public exhibition, which is this Saturday. And anybody who from Oundle who is interested in any of this is welcome to go. It will be open between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. Gosh, that took me a long time to go through. A slight diversion, but it is perhaps
I think
important.
very helpful actually. It's sort of very clearly.
Right, moving on. We're getting closer to something about residential, I think. OH1, residential windfall sites development. Permission will only be granted for small-scale residential developments on windfall sites, which again there is a definition of, within the urban area, including redevelopment, subject to meeting all of the following criteria and relevant requirements set out in other policies in this plan and the Joint Core Strategy. So the scale, massing and density of the scheme is in keeping with the character of the neighbouring buildings and the town generally, does not involve the outward extension of the built-up area outside of the town boundary. The development does not encroach on any local green space. It should be or other open space designation identified within the plan. The scheme will not adversely affect any heritage assets or features, and the design shall be in keeping with the local vernacular as set out in the design statement. Sympathetic materials are to be used. Development will not result in unacceptable loss of amenity for neighbouring uses through loss of privacy, daylight or visual intrusion. Traffic and parking generated by the proposals does not result in an unacceptable direct or cumulative impact on congestion or road and pedestrian safety within the town. And finally, the development provides a beneficial net contribution through the provision of a mix of dwelling types and sizes towards meeting both the market and affordable housing needs of Oundle in accordance with the most up-to-date demonstration of need. It's quite a comprehensive policy on windfall sites, which is necessary because windfall sites will fall outside the numbers game that we have to play. So the Joint Core Strategy, I think, told us that we had to have a minimum of 257 houses from memory. In fact, you'll see in a minute that the provision envisaged by this is slightly higher than that figure. But the reality is there'll be more than that number built because of windfall sites. And windfall sites are defined as those not specifically identified as available in the local plan process. They normally comprise previously developed sites that have unexpectedly become available. Councillor Best.
Sorry,
Think
when I
Councillor.
look at that, and you're probably the best person to advise me on the planning, wouldn't any of that apply to any windfall development site, whether or not we had a neighbourhood plan? I mean, surely all of those criteria would apply anyway. There's nothing particularly new or different there.
You're probably
Well, we're
right,
putting it out
in
there.
as much as when ENC, as the planning authority, come to consider it, they are likely to look at all of those factors, as would this council in considering an application and making observations upon it. The importance of including it, in a sense, is to make it's a belt and braces job. It sets it all out clearly. Of course, the risk of setting, I'll be with you in 1 minute, Councillor. The risk of setting it out clearly is if you were to miss something, then of course, because it's not there, the chances are that people will be able to say, well, you don't say anything about that, therefore. So it is quite important to make sure that we haven't missed anything. But this has been drafted, after all, by a planning consultant who knows his stuff. Councillor Oakes.
Well, basically, yeah, it's just a generic statement, isn't it?
It is.
It's casual.
And that's the point I'm making about a lot of the stuff that's in here. It's putting together a lot of generic statements, which is a good thing, yes, that people understand they're all there. But there's nothing radically new or innovative.
Well, this is the point I was going to try and make. I mean, surely our purpose is to try to make it town specific. You take the principles of the generic statements, but we have to make it town specific because that's who we represent.
I mean, the two ways in which you could argue it's town specific is there are cross-references to the design statement, which of course is entirely specific to Oundle, and references to meeting housing needs in Oundle. There was a point that the planning committee raised in connection with this, which was that what it doesn't address specifically. Sorry, Peter, have you got
Well, you're on one of the points I wanted to raise, but you carry on and I'll listen to you first.
It may or may not answer your question, I don't know. Yeah, one of the things the planning committee raised was this, that there doesn't appear to be anything anywhere in the plan, and if it was going anywhere it would probably be here, that talks about any specific sort of attitude to the issue of properties that are simply built in the garden of existing properties, which, bearing in mind the discussion that the planning committee were having earlier tonight in relation to 5 Cotterstock Road, may be of relevance. And it's also interesting because in Gladthorne, one of the things that's happened is, because they have no kind of de minimis rule there, we in looking at this, I have to say, took a view that it was pointless to consider developments of under 5 and probably realistically under 10. You know, you wouldn't allocate something for the building of 5 houses. I think the smallest here is sort of 10.
It's
But
far, isn't it? It's probably the smallest, probably.
Well, in this plan, I think the smallest is a site off Wakeley, which has got 10 on it, and I think Millersfield has got 12 from memory. But in Gladthorne, what we found was that loads of people came forward saying, I want to build a house in my garden. Quite often, I want to build somewhere that I can retire stroke downsize into in my garden and then sell off, obviously, my main property. And whether, frankly, neighbourhood plans should be going down to the level of saying, well, we approve of Fred's plan to build a house in his garden, but we're not so keen on Bill's, I'm not so sure. That's an issue for Gladthorne. Whether we should say anything or not, or can, was one of those questions that planning thought we might like to pose to James Wilson in an ideal world and just float the thing with him and say, you know, do people do this? If so, is there a much possibility, and what would be the factors we need to look at?
Yeah, I know that Councillor Peel wants to come in, but I just want to say it's a case by case.
I think you may very well be right, and I've already suggested that in Blackthorn perhaps what they should be saying is that whilst that you would have to look at these things on a case-by-case basis and just literally judge them on their merits, perhaps against certain criteria, but rather than actually allocating them as part of a development. Councillor Peel.
Yeah, what I'm quite worried about on the building of houses in Arundel is that nowhere in this neighbourhood plan is there actually any provision for social housing. There was provision for affordable housing, but there was a lot of people in the area of Arundel now, especially the young people, can't afford affordable housing. They have to have social housing. And we are going down the road where eventually there's not going to be any social housing in Arundel. And the problem we're going to have then is when we're all in our dotage, there isn't going to be anybody to actually look after us because we've let all those people leave our town. And we have to sort of put somewhere, I think, in either the windfall site or the new housing site allocations, a provision where we must put in that we have to have some sort of social housing, not affordable housing, because affordable housing can be one where you sort of, as I did when I first moved here, I bought 50% of the house. I managed to afford that because obviously at the time I was going through a very rough time. But, there's a lot of people who can't afford to do that. And they need to have social housing. And those people need to live here because if they don't live here, they're not going to contribute to looking after people that live here. And we're becoming, as you've seen by the statistics in this neighbourhood plan, we are becoming an older type of town. And if we don't look to that particular situation, we're not going to get those people coming in here. Because they can't afford the buses, they can't afford things like that. Sorry?
It's expensive to live here. Get on the housing ladder, it's quite hard.
It's very, very hard, especially in Arundel. And local people, local children, don't want to move out of Arundel, but they are moving out because they can't afford to live here. The private rental houses now are so expensive that there's very few people, unless they're two professionals, they can't afford £8,500, £1,200, which is what houses now are being rented for here. We've got to somewhere put in that we need to have some sort of social housing in this neighbourhood plan.
I understand the point. I hate the term affordable housing because everybody, the layperson's view of affordable housing is to somehow buy a 4-bedroomed house for about £130,000. And of course it doesn't mean that at all.
No.
Indeed, generically the term affordable housing should also encompass social housing because it should be looking at both affordable housing, which might take the form of co-ownership type properties, but it should also take the form of housing that is available for rent and housing that is available for rent at an affordable rent. Now, one of the issues that you get with all developments and developers is that you may have a target figure for affordable housing and the JCS gives one. In fact, it was quite strange because it gave figures for affordable housing and then singled Arundel out for completely different treatment to everywhere else in East Northamptonshire.
Excuse me, when you say affordable housing, are you talking about buying housing or renting housing?
We're talking about, I'm using it in its broadest sense, which is the sense in which it's used within the JCS of being both housing that might be shared ownership, housing that might be available at a market rent, and housing that might be social housing rented out through, for example, housing associations or similar. And one of the pities is that the term is used at all. It would be much simpler if actually you talk about shared ownership properties, social rents, market rents and so on, because at least it would be clearer what the hell you're talking about. Councillor Oakes.
Well, I mean, we came across this, I came across this I said all along, I said, what on earth is affordable housing in Handel? What does that mean? The reality is that people who have a reasonable income can actually afford a mortgage which is cheaper than you would be able to rent the same property. I'm not entirely sure about the difference between affordable and social is. I mean, I go back to the days of Margaret Thatcher, selling off all the council houses. Well, she didn't.
You can't shoot them now.
No, but I mean, you get what you get. I mean, I used to work on this years and years ago, where people getting massive discounts to flog their council houses, which took an enormous amount of social housing, if we can call it that, out of the system. Now, I just can't see how we can reverse that in our town.
I'm not saying we should reverse it, but what I'm saying is that we should put somewhere in here that some of the affordable housing must be socially rented.
Right, can I have one at a time? That's the best.
Just, we all empathise with what Councillor Field's saying, but unless I'm very much mistaken, unless we commit as a council to buy land and build council houses, we can't do that. Yeah, I don't think what you're talking about is feasible any other way. I don't think we're in a position to commit to do that as a council at this time. So it's a nice sentiment, but I don't practically see how we can do it. So in the interest in trying to move it on, unless anybody can see how we could do that in any meaningful way, I think it's a lovely idea, but I don't think it's achievable.
I understand exactly where you're coming from. If you exclude the possibility of housing associations being involved, you'd be right. But the possibility of there being housing associations that might be able to let at a less than market rent is something that may be viable. What I do want to also bear in mind is this, that it is a requirement under the JCS, just as it was under the previous regime, that for all developments over a certain size, there has to be a certain number of affordable homes. It says it quite clearly, black and white. And unfortunately, in the small print, it basically says, however, if the developer can show that the development would not be viable on the basis of that level of quote-unquote affordable housing, then of course you must adjust it to the point where you can deliver the development, because of course the MPPF is all about delivering the development. And so of course every developer turns around and says, we can't possibly have 40% on our site, it won't stand it. Okay, they have to try and demonstrate it, but you can imagine that what happens is that local authorities gradually back down, and that's been the history of things. I think that whole issue is something that, again, if we are going to engage with James Wilson, we might want to talk that through with him. So I don't want to lose sight of it, but I'd rather try to move on through some of the more specific policies again, and then see whether or not there is something that we can take forward on that score, because I don't see any demur around the room that in an ideal world there would be a mix which included that. And whether you can put more into this or beef it up in some ways is I'm not sure.
It's not about the policy though, it's about the implementation. That's the problem. It's implementing it. It costs money. It's simple as that.
Yes, that's part of it.
Yeah, so I look at Creed Road, and if you look at Creed Road, there are a lot of social housing there, moving through Spire Homes and now Longhurst, or vice versa, I'm not sure. And they have actually got houses built by Persimmon that are now socially rented houses. There are some co-ownership houses up there as well, but there are socially rented houses. So an housing association can be involved with a private developer to actually build social housing.
Well, I built them up.
That's already written.
We've already got them up the top of our road.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying, we've already got that, it's
We've
not,
got
it's
loads of them
not,
up.
all it's got social, it's got affordable housing, it hasn't got social housing.
I think we may get bogged down in this.
That's what I'm
because
saying.
You've got loads of stuff to go through yet,
Well-
David.
As I say, I don't want to lose sight of it because I think there's great sympathy for that viewpoint, and
Definitely.
we will look, after we've been through all of the bits that deal with housing in here, perhaps we'll just come back to this issue, because it may be that we have some broad point or points that we will want to take up with James Wilson, because you can see that we seem to be pushing ourselves in a direction of wanting to do that, though we may also want to consider the MPS thing as well in a minute. So I'm going to move on past the windfall sites, because other than the point that I think planning made about do we have a say anything specifically about infill of single properties in gardens, clearly the biggie in the whole of this document is what follows next on page 32. It's policy OH2, the new housing site allocation. There is a narrative section above it which talks about taking into account the completion of dwellings since 2011, commitments from planning permissions already granted, and remaining sites allocated in the rural Northoundle and Thrapston plan. A total of 203 dwellings need to be allocated by 2031. Now that was lower than that sort of 257 figure that I mentioned. And then you see the little box underneath, and you notice the words total allocation 312, almost exactly 100 more than on the face of it we quote unquote need to have. If anything is going to be a hard sell to the public, it may well be the fact that on the face of it we are advocating far more development than we quote unquote need to, and probably far more development than they actually want. Now, in fact, one of my concerns with this was that, first of all, it's all very well talking about the remaining sites allocated to the rural Northoundle and Thrapston plan. There are two sites. There is the balance of the development that lies between Ashton Road and Herne Road, and there is the dairy farm site on Stoke Hill. Now, the dairy farm site on Stoke Hill is 20 houses.
20, yeah.
And the best information is that there is no likelihood of that being brought forward by 2031, i.e. within the lifetime of the existing RNOTP. And it seems entirely artificial to kind of make assumptions around that being delivered. And if it's not going to be delivered, and you need the numbers, you have to find them from somewhere else. And you will notice that, for example, there is nothing in this plan to carry forward that site to the period of this, beyond 2021 to 2031. There are actually similar problems with the other development of Ashton Road and Herne Road, partially, I think, because it is in multiple ownership. And I think the difficulty has been that nobody has been able to pull it together to actually deliver the latter part of that development. And it's actually quite unlikely, according to Councillor Stern, who, with his planning background at ENC, is likely to know. But his view is that it's highly unlikely that that's ever going to see the light of day, either before 2021 and under RNOTP, which means that the numbers that are allocated to that site have arguably got to be found from somewhere else. And then you start to actually understand why there's a difference between 203 and 257.
You know, what about the, may I just ask, I mean, what about the site that was similarly refused permission, 95, and towards the 8605 off Herne Road?
What about it?
Well, is this in the equation?
It's in the equation in this sense. First of all, it is one of the allocated sites by us in this.
That's why I asked the question.
So it is there. when we come onto that site and we look at the specific policy relating to it, I'll have more to say. Councillors should be aware that Persimmon put in a planning application, I've forgotten now whether it was 2015 or the beginning of 16, but anyway, I think it was 15. They put in a planning application, ENC refused it, largely on the basis that it was not allocated for development in RNOTP, which was still considered current, and in any event they had a 5-year land supply and it wasn't needed to make up a deficiency. Persimmon appealed it and the inspector agreed with ENC and threw it out. The representations, incidentally, that we made that it was preempting our neighbourhood plan went down like a lead balloon because of the stage at which the neighbourhood plan had reached. Because there is a potential shortfall in the numbers with other sites that are allocated not actually potentially coming forward, certainly if you got to a stage where ENC couldn't demonstrate a 5-year land supply, Persimmon could be back with an application for 95 houses on that site. However, as you will see later, they have agreed to something else within this plan. So what is suggested is that a total of 312 dwellings are allocated across a variety of sites. Many councillors will recall that a questionnaire was delivered to every home in Oundle. It had sections on all the various aspects of the neighbourhood plan, including, of course, the issue of housing. Various questions were put, and in essence, one of them was, would you like one large site, or would you prefer it scattered amongst a number of sites? And another one essentially was aimed to try to see whether people thought that it was going to be a good idea to try to restrict development as far as was possible to within 1 mile radius of the town centre, on the idea that if it was a mile it was just about walkable, but if it gets much more, people are not likely to walk or even perhaps cycle. Confronted with the questions in the way that they were put in that questionnaire, a not surprising response frankly came back saying, yeah, we like the idea of not more than a mile, and actually yes, we'd rather have smaller sites scattered around the town. That has largely driven what you see there, because these sites are scattered all around the town. They comply with the 1 mile bit, just in some cases, but they are all over the place, and bar one, they're all for sort of 50 or less. The bar one is a site north of Benefield Road as you go out of town.
Is that Biggin Estates?
Biggin,
yeah.
And that site would be big enough to hold all 312 houses on one site.
Yep.
Now, the possible issue from the point of view of the town's acceptance of things is, will the town, when they suddenly see exactly how it is, turn around and say, you know what, actually we'd rather have had 312 up there than have all these other sites. It's the imponderable. The only thing you can say is that 13 months ago, all of these sites were spelled out at the annual town meeting to the people who were present. There wasn't a riot. There wasn't a massive follow-up correspondence deluging the council saying this is appalling, we don't want all of this development. So it is perhaps unlikely that we'll get that response. But if I have a slight worry, it is that there may be a combination of people worried about numbers and maybe people worried about the way in which we've distributed these sites, and possibly in connection with 2 of the sites particularly that we'll touch on. So there's the plan, and the endorsement at the bottom. Affordable housing provision should be delivered in accordance with other policies set out in the development plan. Now, whether they are set out clearly enough, whether they are capable of being tweaked in a way that we are happier with, you know, we may well have to look at. So there's the first thing.
Just a quick point. I'm not sure if we mentioned it in the last planning meeting, but in the introduction for this, I think there needs an additional bit, because it doesn't mention anything about what you've just said.
It was one of the points that I actually did make to Councillor Stern when I went through this. If you look at, I'm pretty sure that if you look at I think it's something like 4-page thing
Yes,
that was sent through to him, one of the things I pointed out was exactly that I felt that
It's very important.
although space is always at a bit of a premium, it's quite a long document. Putting in a little bit more isn't going to be the straw
This
that
is
breaks
the
the
thing
camel's
that
back.
might be
But if it explains things a bit more clearly
Particularly the allocation.
around this allocation issue, I personally think that would be better. And I don't think that there's going to be any demur on that from, for example, Councillor Stern or others of his group, none of whom sadly are here this evening. I wasn't sure whether any of them might be prior to yesterday evening when I had a telephone call from former Councillor Neil Fraser, which I'll refer to again before we finish.
Just
Can I
a
say
point on
please?
that, David, is that I think it's very important that we, although Phil Stern is, you know, in there and been in the planning, that we, if we feel that it needs extra points putting in, that we control this document as a council. And it's not House document, it's the town document. And if we feel that needs to go in there, we take back control of it from Phil Stern and say, well, sorry Phil, you might not want it here, but we do.
Yeah,
And I think that, as you say, is we're going to come back to it anyway. I don't want to drag on about it, but that on that document, the affordable housing thing, that's our space for more a more robust statement of
What affordable
council
housing
unit.
actually means.
Yeah.
The town got what they wanted at that time as a result of that questionnaire. We gave them what they
That's
said
exactly
they
the
wanted.
point.
we all know what we've all been in council with Councillor Stern, and we know how forceful he can be on certain things and how, you know, he can push things along in his direction. So I think we want to be mindful of that, and as I say, take it back if we can.
Well, to some extent, of course, we have taken it back because we're having this discussion tonight. But it may very well be that the feeling of this meeting is that the remainder of this process is driven from within the council, not necessarily externally. It's a subject I intended to deal with at a slightly later point in the meeting, so don't let me forget
I thought
it.
perhaps you probably would, but no.
Councillor Oakes.
I just say I'm in favour of that. The move, it seems to me, is trying to develop self-sustaining developments. So, if, for example, we were to have 300 houses built on Big Inns Farm, you then want to put other bits and pieces in there so that they don't necessarily have to come and use the facilities in Oundle. That might mean the news agents or goodness knows what else. That seems to be the move. And the fact is also we've got 1,500 being built at Melbourne and then another 1,000 on Dean Airfield. And they're just over the hill. You know, this is a really, I don't want to be too parochial about this. This is a big issue. The government want us to build houses. We don't really want them to build them here because we think we're already hemmed in. But I suppose it's like a managing retreat policy. Anyway.
Well, we certainly are not in a position to turn round and try to suggest that we have less development than the JCS does, as we've got to have, for example.
Can I
Councillor
just
Peel.
speak to Councillor Oakes about it? See, I think that the developments, apart from the fact that there's no social housing mentioned, I think Deanthorpe and Weldon and the houses are a good thing for Oundle.
I don't know whether they are or they're not.
I consider them to be very good, not just because of hopefully bringing in younger people into the area, which we all need, but also bring businesses in business into the town centre. And if you look at our town centre, it is probably now the least representative of a decent small town centre that I've seen for a very long time. You go to other town centres, little town centres I'm talking about, little towns that have shops, etc. In the town centre. I'm not talking about sort of outside the town centre, I'm talking about the town centre now. The shops that we have now don't really represent small businesses anymore because they're not that good. And the only way to improve those is to get people coming into Arundel, and if you get developments around Arundel, Deansthorpe, etc., hopefully you'll get a better quality of individual retail units coming into the town, so it will keep the retail side of Arundel and keep Arundel alive in the longer term.
I think that's a very interesting point. However, I'm going to stop it there because it's not the matter we need to talk about. No, I think it's a perfectly valid point to make, and it's an interesting discussion, but perhaps for another day, bearing in mind where we are. Can I just take a feel? Because as I said earlier, I think this is the critical thing. We have to end up singing from the same song sheet. The council has to either back the idea of 312 houses, or it doesn't. Now, there will be all sorts of consequences, arguably, if we suddenly say we're not happy. But if people are generally not happy with it, well, we'll just have to see where it takes us to. But in principle,
Yes.
do we have a problem with suggesting that number?
No, I don't.
Good.
It's only because if we don't, the odds are between now and whenever, we're likely to get pressure to build some more anyway. So what we've got there, we think, is feasible,
Puts it in control,
reasonable,
doesn't it?
yeah, and it gives us something in hand if there is pressure at a later date.
Talking of pressure to build even more, the site, the site that we're going to look at next, because we're now going to look at the specific site allocations, is land east of St Christopher's Drive. It may also be described as being off Ashton Road, but access would actually be from St Christopher's Drive. It is the site we were talking about earlier. It's the one that Persimmon put in a planning application for 95 homes. And you will notice that this says make provision for approximately 45 dwellings, i.e. roughly half of what they wanted. Because we simply could not give to each developer what they wanted, we had to find alternative ways of putting this together. And this was one of those sites which we looked at and said, yeah, actually, it could stand it. On the face of it, there's enough room, etc. And it's potentially a suitable site for development. But we don't necessarily want to put 90 on there. Persimmon have accepted these numbers. All the developers, in fact, have been taken on board. There are letters from all the various developers around this, and I'll come on to those to you both in 1 second. Part of what we have said to Persimmon is that, bearing in mind that the site is generally considered suitable, that the balance of the site, whilst not being allocated for development within this period, would be considered to be suitable for development if an allocated site did not materialise, and could certainly be considered suitable for development beyond the planned period of 2031. It's not the only site where that takes place. The same may be said to be true of Benefield Road North. Not actually any of the other sites at all, but those two sites, that has been part of the discussion we've had. Councillor Peel and Councillor Oakes.
Whether in the future Persimmon will be allowed to build the extra 50 houses that you've answered that, so that was really effectively my point. Yeah.
I mean, originally their application was 95. If we now say you can't have as many as that, are they just going to build so far into the site and then leave a field?
The short answer is
lovely little ransom.
The short answer is yes. I mean, they will develop it in such a way as to make sure they can develop the rest of it. You'll note the bottom bullet point, provide suitable noise mitigation measures or setback development from the A605, because of course the site comes right up to the bypass. And therefore, however it's developed, it's going to be set back a little bit, even if it does the full development.
Yeah, well, they were going to build I forgot what they call it now, it would be
A bund.
a bund, that's right. They're going to build a bund to stop the noise.
Indeed, and I suspect that will still have to be part of it. You'll notice that if you like, the goodie that comes with this site is provide a corridor to create a footpath rerouting UF6 as part of the Oundle circular route. So they're not offering as much as certain other developers are arguably offering, but that is part of what they are putting into the mix. That doesn't necessarily mean that they won't be forced to contribute other things through a Section 106, or SIL as the case may be.
I'd just like to say that I do find, trying to find something in here that clearly shows you the circular route that's promised, i.e. the gift, it's not clear. And there needs to be some form of graphic, whether we can do it or not, which actually clearly, because the whole plan is, look, you know, we're doing this, but here's our big reward. And I think you've got, if you're going to sell it, you've got to have the positives really thrust at people.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and yeah, we'll certainly take that one back.
Well, I'm going to make that. I've had conversations with our mayor about this. How we sell this, if you can call it selling, to residents, it's really important that we don't send them out. That's got to be condensed. It needs some lovely pictures in it. Maybe just a few plans and stuff like that, and say there's 47 there, 62 there. That's for me, it's getting bums on seats or people to tick boxes to say we approve this. That's possibly our biggest problem.
Well, nobody's going to wade through this current document,
I mean, the reality, you're right in the sense that you couldn't put this through every letterbox in the town because it would cost millions of pounds, and you know, it just phase people completely. However, one of the things we will have to talk about on another night, because we're not going to have time to do this tonight, will be to look at how do we best get over to the members of the public what is in this document in some form of suitable précis that can either go out with an oracle or be an oracle. Councillor Pearce.
Can I just ask one other question? I'm not a favourite of planning because I don't sort of come to planning things, but I am assuming that the builders that will be doing these houses, etc., have a maximum time scale when they have to build them. That they're not sort of getting the planning permission for 45 houses or whatever it is, and then leaving it for 14, 15 years.
The way that this works is this. This is a document which says this site is allocated as being suitable for development within the plan period. The developer could come forward at any stage within the plan period and say, I want to apply for planning permission, and all the usual rules apply. That is to say that the planning permission is time limited. You have to implement work on it within a certain period or you lose it. So there is that. There isn't within this plan anything particularly stated about phasing, as far as I can see. In other words, saying we don't necessarily want to get to 2020 and suddenly every site is being developed in Oundle all at once, with all that would involve, and then we get to a point by about 2022 where we've already used up the entire allocation to 2031. Whether there could be talk about phasing, but it gets difficult talking about phasing between sites. If you were talking about the development of one site, you could say, right, well, you know, in the first 5 years you'll develop this much, then you can... But that doesn't fit so well with some of this, but it might do with certainly the Bennefield Road North site, which is 120, for example. But I don't think we've actually got as far as thinking that through yet.
I ask, is the land to the right of the, shall I call it the horse track on off Herne Road, which is owned by a former councillor, is that part of this?
No.
I didn't think it was. But I mean, there's a potential for Right.
It's not been it was never put forward. If I restrict myself to saying that. Let's keep moving on, because it's 25 past 9 and we've still got quite a lot of this to get through. Described as Site 3, land south of Herne Road. This is in the ownership of a former councillor. It is right on the current built edge of the town. In other words, it's just beyond the last big house in Herne Road. As you sort of go past the school on your left, there is a big white house on your right. It's Tony Murdoch's house. And then there is open land beyond it. And it's that open land that is the subject of this. And this is an interesting one. It says this: it's allocated for residential and leisure development and open space. Site will deliver high quality development that will make provision for approximately 45 dwellings, a mix of retirement flats and smaller self-contained houses to be encouraged. Provide approximately 4 hectares of land for recreational sports uses, which can also be used by Prince William School. Create an access that doesn't conflict with Prince William School exit. Take full account of flood risk and on-site drainage issues, and then it talks about upgrading various footpaths. In essence, when the proposer of this site came to us, he said, I have this idea whereby at the sort of far end of the site, i.e. furthest away from the built environment, there is a tract of land that would be perfectly suitable for development as a cricket field, in case the Oundle Cricket Club find themselves without a home should the school want to redevelop the site in Milton Road. And so it's coming forward on that basis of a mix between the residential bit at the top and some leisure facilities at the bottom. So this is one of those developments that actually offers all sorts of potential pluses that come with it. Councillor Best.
To me, the real opportunity with this site, having been a governor of Prince William for many years, is the leverage for the developer is to work with county highways to have some sort of bus access off at the junction of the A605, which would allow school buses to pull in, drop kids off at the school, as well as road access to the development.
I have to say that during the whole process of this, discussion about whether the site that we've just looked at, which was site 1, the Ashton Road site, and or this site, could be accessed from the bypass rather than through the town, exercised us greatly. In an ideal world, the answer would almost certainly, I think, be yes, probably to both. In practice, there are practical difficulties with accessing the Persimmon site. So far as this one is concerned, part of the difficulty was that the school itself didn't seem at all keen on actually creating an access way when this was discussed with them. And the other thing was that highways were saying, if, for example, you wanted to build an access road, you'd need a roundabout and you'd need a budget of around about £1 million to do it, which then made any potential development completely uneconomic. So, however desirable it might be, I think it's highly unlikely to happen.
To me, a 45 dwelling development is not made non-viable by an extra £1 million.
Well, it's interesting.
At some point in all this development, something has to be done to improve the access to that school.
But they have said create access, and something that we can discuss. It does say create access.
But it needs to be vehicular access, and it needs to be A605. It's nobody's ploughing more vehicles along Herne Road or Ashton Road.
Perhaps
at some point where that changes.
And I'm not sure if the A605 will actually be up to that. Another roundabout on there would be interesting.
Can I just say, before I come on to Councillor Oates, in connection with that whole traffic issue, 2 separate traffic surveys were commissioned during the course of the work on this plan. Both of them have essentially said you can develop any and all of these sites, and you will not have a traffic problem.
Compared to certain national averages or norms for the south of England.
I merely repeat what we were told. That was their view. The only thing that they felt might create a problem in planning terms would be if you put 300 odd houses on Benefield Road North and they were all coming down into town from there. So whilst the perception is that there are going to be issues around some or all of these developments, the advice that has been forthcoming and on which this plan is based is that, frankly, access issues are not stoppers for any of them. Councillor Oates.
Look, I know this development very well for various reasons, and it was originally proposed by an individual who owns the land that he would be prepared to cede the land to allow a drop-off from the A605.
I think you're right. The problem wasn't that. The problem lay elsewhere.
No, look.
The problem is the cost of the infrastructure associated with the A605.
All I'm saying is that this has been trundling around for ages. I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, I declare an interest in...
On the basis that
It's
it's 9:30, we've still got quite a bit of way to go. Let's not get too bogged down in a debate on this. Let's move on to the next site. I said that I thought that there were two sites in here that might prove particularly contentious, and this is one of the two.
Yes.
This is land owned by Anne Miller and her family, thus rejoicing in the name of Miller's Field. It's an open site, and you have currently got some allotments, private allotments, that are down one side of the site, the nearest to the town. The scheme that's come forward is for approximately 12 residential dwellings, again on the basis of these being smaller or retirement homes. Roughly half the site, so just over half a hectare, for allotments with water provided and small on-site parking area, together with a certain amount of open space. There'll be adequate access for vehicles, cyclists and pedestrians, and again it has to take into account flood risks. And although that site may have some issues at the brook end of it, if I can call it that, the thinking is that it would not prevent certainly residential use that bordered the Benefield Road. It would be important, and it's part of the plan, that the site on Benefield Road has some sort of sight lines through it, because at the moment you have an attractive view through there, yes, right across what's sometimes called Spragg's Field, which was also put forward for development but was one of the sites that was completely rejected, right across to the open land, down towards, as it were, Dairy Farm, if you want to think about it that way. Councillor Fuller.
Yeah, I mean, again, if we're trying to market this, because it's not going to look like, the impression one gets from that picture is it's going to fill the whole field, and it's not.
No, it's only going to take the top off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we do these graphics,
yeah,
it's got to try and show the reality.
I take your point entirely. It's one of the things which I hope, if we get to the point of having a sort of developer presentation evening, which is something I'm keen to do. Definitely. Of course, if people actually see this, and we've had the benefit of seeing some plans drawn up, it may alleviate a number of the concerns that might otherwise be there, and I totally take on board your point.
I actually did see parts of this when the Millers actually presented it to Roger, I was on the committee then, with Roger, that's quite Sturman, and it looked really nice.
Yes, I think it will look nice.
Yeah.
It just doesn't look.
It doesn't look
worrying there.
It looked really nice. They were basically bungalows you put on that particular thing. But the allotments around the side and down the end actually made it look open plan and quite roomy. And I thought it went quite well in that particular area.
It was actually designed by Mark Baines, who's on paper.
Yes, it was.
Just to point out,
That may... Right, sorry.
these things about flooding, and I've already said it, but just to make sure everybody's aware, we are doing a full survey which will include these sites sometime in October, I think.
I mean, the best information that we have been able to get is that what is proposed will not be scuppered by flood risk.
No.
But because there is a public perception that that site is difficult, that you have to put the wording in. I mean, I'll be somewhat dismayed if your results come up and tell us something different, but cross that bridge when we get to it. Moving on, the next site is site 12, land adjacent to the cemetery in Stoke Doyle Road. Interesting, this one. This is described as a site delivering high quality development that will make provision for approximately 50 residential dwellings. So it's a bigger site than some. I'll say a bit more about that.
Burial sites.
It will also provide for an extension of approximately half a hectare to the cemetery. And again, it makes the reference to the flood risk and on-site drainage issues. Now, we have a problem in as much as we need the population of Angle to stay healthy, because at the moment there are very few burial spaces left in our cemetery. However, if we get a half-hectare site, I am reliably informed, that is to say the Mayor has told me that our estates officer has told him that half a hectare should be just about enough to last 100 years.
It's about 1.23 acres or something like that.
Which goes well beyond the plan period. Now, the council had tried to acquire cemetery land quite separate from this process and had been running up against the buffers. Those who saw an eye to the main chance realised that if they came to us with a proposal under which we got some much needed cemetery land, they were likely to be met somewhat favourably. I think it may be fair to say that the process with them was slightly tortuous, because the figure that has emerged was a compromise figure between that which was originally sort of offered to them and a much higher figure that they said was entirely necessary to make the scheme viable, but we ended up with a figure that you see before you. It's quite a, not insignificant size of development, but given the benefit to the town that the development brings, it is why it is there, and it is as simple as that.
Fantastic.
The big issue may very well be whether we can prevail upon the persons concerned to make the land available to the town at an early point, possibly even before we get to the stage of them being anywhere near applying for planning permission. But that remains to be negotiated.
Is that the land to the left? It's the bit you own it. Or is it the Fairfield as well? It's Fairfield, isn't it?
Yes. One of the
It's right next to the
I
cemetery.
just wondered if you, when you said it, I thought, are you talking about the land to the left of the cemetery lodge?
The whole thing got a bit complicated because when the group first started looking at it, the initial housing working party, we were labouring under the misapprehension that the land that we were looking at was all in one ownership, and it transpired it wasn't. And it only transpired it wasn't quite late in the process when we discovered that one owner was actually actively promoting their bit and the other one wasn't interested at all. So it led to a certain amount of rejigging, but what has emerged is what you see. Moving, in a sense, relatively swiftly on, the next one may not take us too long. This is site 14. It's, in practice, the smallest site in terms of numbers. Land south of Wakerley Close, a site to deliver high quality development, approximately 10 dwellings, lower density homes, larger gardens, potentially acceptable in this location. Access can be provided to the west of Wakeley Close, and again there's some upgrading of a footpath. It's a site which lends itself to that kind of development, shall we say.
What does high quality development mean? Everything is high quality development. Every
Yeah,
site.
I must admit, it wouldn't necessarily. I think for that, actually read large and expensive.
But then
I
it
think-
says high quality development, and then other ones say high quality development, but small houses.
I'm not entirely sure that I like the words high quality, and it may be
Quality
that.
sounds like expensive.
Yeah, I think it should just say we'll deliver a development that can.
It's not going to be social housing, is
It's not going to be so.
This is not going to be social housing. I should say that the person putting forward this site put forward 3 sites. This one, Bennefield Road North and Bennefield Road South. 2 of the 3 sites have been taken forward. This one with these small numbers, and the Bennefield Road North site we'll be looking at in just a moment. The Bennefield Road South site isn't allocated at all, but was part of our, this could potentially come forward post 2031, or if we have a crisis on numbers, it may be a suitable site for some development. And that takes us to the land north of Bennefield Road. Now this is a very large site indeed. And the proposal is for 120 dwellings. Because it is a large site, hence the comment lower density homes with larger gardens would be acceptable because there's the space. There is provision for an area of open community space of approximately 5.5 hectares. I must admit, I struggled to envisage 5.5 hectares, but it's pretty sizable. The purpose of this, which is likely to be made available to the town, therefore it may become our responsibility to operate it and maintain it, so there may be some cost implications going forward. But it would provide a suitable site for open-air festivals, such as the Oundle International Festival concerts, etc. Currently held at the Wharf and previously held on land belonging to Oundle School. And it was a vision of the council at one time that Oundle should become a quote-unquote festival town. And it seemed logical, if you were going to become a festival town, that it probably was necessary for the town to have within its ownership, or at least control, a site suitable for that purpose. Of course, it also would have the benefit of breaking up a large development by sticking a large area in the middle of it. And I assume that since you wouldn't actually need 5.5 hectares unless you were going to run something the size of Woodstock, that in practice, if you put the concert in the middle, then there's quite a lot of expanse before you start getting to the houses. But quite how you'd handle all of that, I don't know. But that's what comes with it. And you'll see that there's talk of natural screening and a buffer between the residential area and festival field. I think to which read sort of trees and possibly one of them their buns.
It's not a million miles away from the golf course either.
No. And again, some work on footpaths. It's fair to say that when we looked at this site and thought about developing it in full at some point, and essentially, if you like, the bottom bit nearest to Bennefield Road is the bit that's going to be developed first. The reserve bit is beyond that, moving up towards what I might call the sort of whole Creed Road development. And unfortunately, because of the building that's taken place there, short of buying a house or houses and knocking them down, there will be no vehicular access from one development to the other. But there is a potential for a footpath and cycle access. And there was certainly talk at one point that this site might be suitable for a small shop or shops, because it's quite, it's relatively remote from the town centre, and it would service both the new development and the existing one. But that would be almost in phase 2, which isn't planned for this planned period anyway. but I just mention it
It's worth mentioning that.
because it was sort of part of the thinking. We come to the last site. I said there were two sites that I thought might be controversial. This is probably the second one. This is described as land east of Cotterstock Road, or possibly north of St Peter's Road. This is the site I talked about earlier, half of which, or just over half of which, lies in Oundle Parish, and the balance of which lies in Glapthorne Parish. The whole site is referred to in RNOTP as being possibly suitable for long-term development for up to 200 houses. And certainly in the earlier days, when this site was being touted to the council for development, it was on the basis of a large 200 house type development. As you will see, instead of getting 140 houses, which would be the sort of Oundle tranche of the 200, this provides for up to 30 dwellings only, and creates a footpath from Cotterstock Road to another footpath. What it doesn't actually say, but strangely enough is in all the promotional material that Provision are putting out in Glapthorne, is that the site also includes an open space. So if you look at that photograph that's there, and you'll see there's a sort of little line marked which would be the development site, and a large chunk of land, if you like, behind it, sort of going right down the slope, because that is a heck of a sloping site. Part of that potentially as an amenity open land. And indeed in Glapthorne they were touting the idea of allotments. Now, Glapthorne already has a number of allotments, not huge numbers, but they've got allotments in the village, and I just struggle to envisage people trekking out from their homes in Glapthorne to go all the way up to what they will see as Oundle in order to go to their allotment in that location, but I may be wrong. But there are some interesting things about this. When they first proposed it with large numbers, they were going to have housing on there, and their sort of plus point was the putting in of a care home in order to meet the needs of those who perhaps can't be accommodated at Polbrook or whatever. I'll give way for a minute.
Yeah, sorry, I understood that in Blackpool the allotments there are going to be disappearing because of the 3 houses being built along there.
No,
Those houses aren't being built now.
not on the allotment site itself, no.
They're next door to it. Sorry, I thought they...
No, so it would have been a valid point, because obviously if they lost their allotments, maybe they'd be a bit more interested in a site out of town, or sort of out of the village, but nevertheless available to them. But no, my understanding is that the allotments are hopefully there to stay. So they put forward all of these plans, and they've produced all sorts of things over the years, and they pride themselves on being quote unquote high quality developments, and they put lots of green bits in and so on. There are some issues with this site.
They certainly are.
I've mentioned the sloping nature of it. That has 2 issues. One, visually, it's quite an important site. A, because from the Cotterstock Road, you get a fabulous view down across the water meadows, across to the river and so on. Currently uninterrupted by housing. If the whole site was developed, that would be affected. If you restrict housing to behind the currently built housing on Cotterstock Road, of course, you don't have quite the same level of impact. There is, and it's not a planning issue as such, but councillors may want to know it, that at least 2 of the properties currently on Cotterstock Road, to my knowledge, have the benefit of restrictive covenants preventing any building on that site whatsoever, on site that would be earmarked for development. So somebody's going to make an awful lot of money being paid off to release their covenants, I suspect, as part of the deal. When this site was proposed for the draft local plan of 1986, and it's sad I can go back 30 years, When it was proposed for that, Anglian Water, amongst others, objected to it, saying that there are problems with this site because there are unusual groundwater flows and springs, and there certainly are. If you try to walk across that field at times, it can be quite challenging because suddenly it turns into a quagmire. So it might be quite challenging to develop. And I know that one of the residents in St Peter's Road, because he used to be my next door neighbour, was an Anglian water engineer who had produced reams of stuff on the thing. But then he wouldn't he, because he was worried it might be behind his house. When this site was put forward in the questionnaire, it got an extraordinarily mixed response. There were some people who thought that it was suitable for residential development, and there was quite a lot of people saying, oh my goodness, no, not there. We want a nice green sweep that goes, in effect, through all our sports clubs, tennis club, rugby club, sort of turns round and keeps going. We want all of that to remain green, and if we had to have some more allotments in Oundle, wouldn't some of that be a great place for allotments? Which is, I'm sure, where Provision got their idea from in the end. We know that there'll be some local opposition. We know that there is some issues around drainage. We know there's a covenant, and just to add to it, there is the water treatment facility, which is not so far away. Now, in practice, you should not build residential accommodation within 400 metres of a water treatment facility. And depending on how you develop the site, obviously it could get quite close. In fact, if you think about Mr Richardson's proposal in Glapthorne, it's practically on top of the thing, let alone anything else. It was certainly an issue of some concern in relation to this site. I say all of those things because I'm pretty well acquainted with it, having lived effectively in that area for effectively 30 years. I suspect, as I said, that if there is going to be issues with the local population saying they don't like a particular site, you'll find this one and Millersfield will be the two. Equally, if we turned around, for example, and said, well, we don't need that many numbers, and if this site and or Millersfield is difficult, why don't we just take them out? The problem that you then have is that you partially develop the whole plan around this idea of spreading the developments around, and you've got your quid pro quos with your cycleways. And two, the developers, particularly Provision, will go ballistic and will doubtless want to challenge the whole thing. They'll probably seek to judicially review the neighbourhood plan and they'll probably plough ahead with trying to put in applications, etc. Anyway, but I think that it's worth saying all of that because there's a lot of history to that site. Councillor Oates.
To add, oddly enough, there are there's no reason to be able to object on planning grounds because you don't have a view.
No.
Not one.
It's not, of course, to do with the residents' views, if you like. It's the general views, the fact that people standing in certain locations can see across.
The river.
And there's the whole thing about the Nene Valley area and trying to preserve views to it and from it, including, of course, it's quite important that views from the river back into Oundle are not adversely affected by development. Now, what's proposed here is right at the top end, out of the way of that. So, if you were going to develop it, that's the place to put it, which is why it is where it is, and why one tries not to extend it so far down. You'll see some of their promotional material seems to show this site as going somewhat further down than that plan does. So there we are. Those are all the sites. And so far, I haven't heard anybody saying, oh my goodness, we can't possibly have that number or we can't have that site or anything else. So if we've got past that, we've broken the back of this. What I want to do in the circumstances, unless anybody has anything to say, is just scoot through the remaining policies in here, which are happily a good deal simpler. What becomes abundantly obvious is that we are no way going to be able to consider the first draft of the design statement because it's already nearly 10 o'clock, much less, well, we certainly aren't going to do that. We may want to talk a little bit about a couple of those other things very briefly because it may affect how we take things forward. There is a policy on safeguarding employment sites. It's at page 40, it's very short. It says existing employment sites at Nene Valley Business Park, East Road and the Wharf shown on the policies map will be safeguarded for employment uses unless it can be demonstrated that these uses can no longer be sustained. The wording coming out of NPPF, JCS, etc., etc. The interesting thing was that when we tried to find sites for more employment land, we couldn't. Nobody came forward with any. When we suggested to the school that certain land that they owned might potentially be suitable, they were lukewarm to say the least and never pursued it. So this plan was not able to identify any such land. So apart from what is already, as it were, there. So it's not adding to it, we're saying keep what we've got. The next policy
Yes, this
is local green space. You'll see a list of bits of land which were thought to be such that there shouldn't be any kind of development, other than in quote-unquote very special circumstances. There's no definition of what a very special circumstance would be. I suppose it's to try and appear to give some flexibility, but I can tell you there would be no enthusiasm from me, or I suspect anybody else very much, to develop any of these. You'll see the list, it's self-explanatory. I just draw attention to the fact that included in it is the Fletton Fields site. That, of course, is the subject of a public inquiry, the results of which we still don't have, unfortunately. And, of course, it may be that the results of that create some issues for what we want to incorporate in here. But certainly, if we have our way, we want to try and designate that as an important site, which, coupled with, if it did succeed in getting village green status, would probably enshrine it for the foreseeable future free from development, which is what I think we want and what the town clearly has intimated previously it wants.
And certainly
So
the school do too.
And certainly the school do, because they played a very active part in the inquiry. One of the observations that the planning committee made was, well, that's fine, but aren't there a few other sites that perhaps should be in there as well? The list is non-exhaustive, but the Prince William playing fields, the primary school playing fields, which actually may have some significance because of plans to develop up there. The festival site on the residential development north of Benefield Road, there seems little point in having it without designating it that we don't want it built on, even if we're going to control it. The sports area on the residential development on land off Herne Road for precisely the same reason. The allotments and open space on the residential development on Miller's Field. You know, these are all things that we're saying, good, we've got them. We don't want to sort of see them come and then see them go again, so designate them.
What about the cricket?
The cricket club is an interesting one because, of course, if the site in Herne Road had not come forward, there's absolutely no doubt at all that the cricket club would have been on that list. Because there is that site, it hasn't been put forward. Nobody really is sure what the school may want to do with that in the longer term, but the cricket club is not secure. They could be easily ousted from there by the school. I know that there'd be political flack the school might be keen to avoid, but they're as aware as anybody of the plans for Herne Road because Richard Tremellian sat on the group, so you know, they know. And there has been speculation that it would make a great site for example, a new boarding house if they decided to build one. I don't suppose they will be making any plans prior to Thursday, but you know, after Thursday, who knows?
Well, they're talking about developing their own Abbott House.
Yes.
That's
I mean,
their last
might be worth a quick sort of show of hands. Do we feel that in this document we should actually make a point about the Milton Road cricket ground side?
Very special circumstance.
I think we should keep it. I think
You
it's
would like to
lovely
keep it?
site.
I mean, I have to say, to some extent, despite the fact that the Herne Road land may become available, my instinct is to say that I would like to keep it, not least because of the fact that I think publicly the public would like us to support that,
Absolutely.
because they probably wouldn't want to see it developed. But I don't know.
I'm
Councillor Oates.
certain that a certain former mayor would be very, very pleased if it was retained there.
Aye.
She just has to stroll across the road. With
Yeah.
her husband, who's a
Well,
very,
it
very...
doesn't have to be retained as a cricket pitch.
No, it could be retained.
No,
but I don't quite know.
I mean, I'm just making a silly remark.
You like to retain it, you'd like to retain it. I must admit, I quite like to retain it.
Yeah.
Yes, the old councillors, but there seems to be a... Oh, my goodness, it's
I think you've got concern.
I think we've got, if it might have been unanimous, but it was certainly overwhelming. So we'll add to the list. Just make a note.
The only issue really is that we don't really have any control over what might happen there.
Well, you have, in the sense that if this was adopted, as it stood, it's in the plan.
Well, it's
It
not
provides...
law, though.
It
It's
prov-
not law though, is it?
It's not law, but it is a planning document that governs the way planning applications are looked at. But it doesn't mean that there couldn't be an application, and it doesn't mean that they might not get it. It just raises the bar for them to do it.
I think that that's exactly the right thing to say.
Just wondering though, have we included the area around the wharf, you know, the football pitch and then all the, I know it gets flooded, but with the cows, it's nice to see cows. By that.
Well, we've said the Oundle Town football pitch.
But it's not the whole area around there.
Well, that's how it goes to the place.
Yes,
Yes.
much of it is.
Yeah.
South Road, David.
What about the
When you say South Road, are you
No,
talking
the
about the land opposite Cobthorne on the other side of the road? Yes.
if you go down Ship Lane, straight across.
Yeah. I mean, when I've had discussions with certainly the previous head,
Over my dead body.
it was pretty much an over my dead body. You know, this will impact adversely on Cobthorne if you build here. It will upset my view.
Because we've had issues with that before.
There are a certain
It's
amount.
a building.
There is some flood issues, but it would do no harm to include it if people
I think
feel
we
that
include
we.
it.
It's part of the building.
South Road.
Apparently it is. The view is an important
Oh,
part.
the views.
Cobthorne, because is it grade 1 or whatever it is?
It's grade 1 listed.
It's grade 1.
Councillor Oakes.
I lived down there, if you remember, opposite the Reds. And, I mean, yes, I take your point about the flooding, but there was no problem when that happened, when the house I was in was built.
Yes, but it's
You'll
not
mention it.
directly in front of Cobthorne, is it?
Put it on the list.
We tried to do something for the football team and they couldn't build anything on that pitch because they were told you can't, planning won't be, we weren't part of the deal.
Councillor Oakes, quickly.
Well, one of the thoughts, and I'm just floating this, was that might be a car park. Place
Yes.
might allude to in every year's time.
I think you can safely say that the school would not release it
Well,
currently for
I
that
say,
purpose.
I agree, but it was just floated at the time.
It was, as indeed was, at one point, the former primary school site in Milton Road. Indeed, if you look at RNOTP, there is something in there about that site and about possible uses, which I think included car parking. And certainly in earlier drafts of this document, we were keen to try and see if it could be made available for other uses, but as you know, it's going to be developed in a non-community way, if I can call it that. We're getting towards the end, folks, you'll be pleased to hear. QV1, views to historic buildings and landscapes. Development across the neighbourhood plan area must have regard to identified local views set out in Appendix X, which we haven't actually yet got, but you know, there will be an Appendix X. These protected views serve to preserve the role that local historic landmarks have on the character of the area, both approaching and looking out from Oundle. It's self-explanatory, and I can't really believe anybody would really want to demur from that. I think we would want people to take that into account. OT1, tourism uses bed and breakfast and hotel accommodation. Right.
Declaring interest, pecuniary.
Yeah, appropriate scales, I can't even speak now. Appropriate scale sustainable tourism development proposals and or extensions to or the expansion of existing tourism uses will be supported through the neighbourhood plan area in principle. Proposals relating to land beyond the settlement boundary will need to demonstrate that the use proposed will not have an adverse impact on the rural landscape. Proposals should not significantly impact on neighbouring uses and provide sufficient car parking related to the use. Change of use of existing residential or commercial properties to provide bed and breakfast accommodation or small to medium-sized hotels will be supported in principle, provided such change does not adversely impact upon other neighbouring properties and provided that there will be adequate on-site parking. The paucity of hotel provision in the area was something that has been picked up over a period of time, and if this town is going to promote itself as a festival town stroke tourism destination, and you know it could and it should, then it really does need to have something like this in it. So I'm hopeful everybody agrees.
Yeah.
Achieving high quality design, in a sense it links to the design statement. It sets out a number of things. I'm not going to read through it unless anybody particularly wants me to. I just suggest that it seems appropriate to include. There's then the bit about the festival site, which we've talked about, making it clear that access should be provided separately from any adjacent residential development, and so on. So a specific policy on that. And then a policy around developer contributions.
One item in the developer contribution, I see the festival site finds its way back in there, as well as having a mention of its own and being mentioned in one of the housing sites. But I noticed the cemetery doesn't appear as any kind of, but it is being provided under a...
Absolutely, and funnily enough, when the planning committee saw this, that was exactly the same point that they came to, because on my little list it says the committee wished to add land for further cemetery provision to this list of things, because although it is there as part of the plan relating to the relevant site, to restate the principle that is something that we are looking for seems to make sense. It makes the whole thing hang together. So we've certainly picked that one up. And that, I believe, is essentially it. Thank you. That's been a bit of a mammoth exercise. However, let's appeal.
There is one point that I'm interested in about.
No, please. I did say that if we got to a point and we hadn't raised something, we should.
Yeah. We haven't dealt with traffic, as far as I can see, within a reasonable amount of discussion on the neighbourhood plan. I mean, it's quite clear that Almond at the moment is overrun by cars. I understand there's going to be bikeways and pathways, etc. But surely we should put in some sort of plan for making it easier to get round Almond. And I would suggest one of the ways of doing that is a one-way system through the town centre and using the town centre going round South Road and up that area. So we can only go one way, all the way round. That's an inner circle.
That has been looked at.
Yeah.
The decision was it would become a wrap round and that would
But I
be...
One at a time.
We've got to do something to ease. I mean, at certain parts of the time of the day now, it is absolutely ridiculous. The town centre, the parking situation, which is awful anyway, because obviously the East Northampton made a stupid decision on the parking. But we should really look at maybe doing or having some suggestion of how we can ease the flow of traffic around the centre of Arundel. Because I believe that it is affecting people coming into Arundel, it's affecting the stores, it's affecting, you know, the way people travel. And I just think we need to have some sort of
I support what Councillor Peel says. To me, it's a glaring omission. We talk about a circular footpath and cycleway, but, and we talk about developing lots of things down, but we don't. We choose to avoid one of the difficult things because there is a novel solution, maybe. But how can you talk about the next 15 years in Arundel and not have something that's going to improve traffic flow?
Let me pick up on that. Can I pick up on this point briefly, because I'm conscious of time?
Yeah.
This was looked at pretty extensively at an earlier stage. It's been looked at both by the Neighbourhood Plan Working Party, as it then was. It's also been looked at by the Town Council. And in fact, part of what was proposed by the early Neighbourhood Plan Working Group, you can now see, because in the town centre itself, you do have the one-way system that now goes around the Market Hall. And that emerged from the Neighbourhood Plan Working Party work looking at traffic issues within the town. I make the point again that 2 successive traffic surveys commissioned at considerable expense have both told us that there are no significant issues in the town, and that the existing sort of housing provision in here isn't likely to impact upon it.
In respect, though, those traffic surveys were conducted in a way which compared them with areas which, national averages, which have much heavier traffic than we want to get used to. It's no good saying the traffic in Arundel, or it's of no interest to us saying traffic in Arundel is not a problem compared to what it is in, I don't know, St Albans or Hemel Hempstead or something. We don't want it to be like that.
I think the further difficulty would be that if we took that point forward, what we'd actually be doing is saying we have to commission a firm of experts in traffic management to look at Arundel and come up with a plan to incorporate. Now, I'll tell you now, A, it'll cost a fortune, B, it'll take a long time, which would mean that either we delay everything very substantially, or arguably, as a town council, we look at this as an issue separate from the neighbourhood plan, because it has been considered as part of the neighbourhood plan. It doesn't, and I accept, it does not come forward with saying anything, because the work that's been done to this point would not, on the face of it, justify it. But I do hear what you say, and it's a view, I have to say, that is shared by, I think, the majority of the town.
We absolutely shouldn't delay, because what we've not touched on about all this is to me, there's a real degree of urgency in getting this town plan agreed, voted for and published, even though it will continue to evolve as things do, and well, we shouldn't get too hung up on trying to make it perfect. So I'm not at all suggesting we hold off until we can incorporate that.
Right.
Can I just say, I think one thing we could do in the plan is identify somewhere where we could have further parking. We desperately need to find a site for that.
Again, I have to say that Mark Felton and his group spent an awful lot of time looking at things like that, and the reality was that only 2 things seemed to, 2 main things going forward. One was the Milton Road site that I've already mentioned that isn't going to happen. The other was the South Road site, which we've mentioned, which isn't going to happen. There was talk about whether or not AMPS could be persuaded to effectively open up the car park behind the wine store as being for general public use, but that doesn't seem to be something they're desperately keen on. And the reality is that the Waitrose car park has alleviated to a degree some of these issues, because there is now considerably more parking around the town than there was before that was there.
Waitrose employees now park all over the town.
That's the
except in their car.
Yeah, that's the downside of it, Councillor Sparks.
The problem that we've got and had all the way through is that I've seen Mark Felton's survey, and yes, he's done a lot of statistical analysis, and yes, he has shown that we haven't got congestion of traffic in the main, apart from a few minutes here and there, like at school opening times and closing times. We haven't got parking issues, there are always a certain number of parking spaces available somewhere. It's driving around and finding them. But the problem we've got, and it's a big problem, and it's keeping people away, and I agree entirely with Councillors Peel and Best on this, it's the perception. It's not the reality, it's the perception that everybody has that there's a parking problem in Oundle. While we have that perception, and certainly all the traders are aware of that, that everybody is saying to them, I won't come to Oundle, I can't park. And that's where the problem is. And we've got somehow to overcome that, either with more parking or somehow selling the idea that we haven't got a problem. Whatever it is, you know,
Perhaps
we've got to work at it.
Perhaps something for the marketing group.
Yeah.
I'll take this. I'm going to make a suggestion in a minute about what we do next.
If you like, I'll not say anything, but I do have an observations about traffic surveys, because when Creed Road went up, Charles and I would know that there was a traffic survey, and we went through that in forensic detail, and fundamentally, because it was paid for by the developer, you got what you expected, which is no problem.
Which of course is why we commissioned 2 independent ones ourselves, which is separate from the work that Mark Felton did.
But I think an important point's been made by the councillors is that we are being, compared to places which are stuffed full of traffic, all over the place, and largely suburban and not town. What's happened is the people of the town have been used to it being a nice place where you can, take your horse and cart here, there and everywhere, all of a sudden discovering that they're now living in sort of like a mini suburbia. And part of it is they're just going to have to get used to it, because we can't move buildings at all. I mean, there's nowhere, and we haven't got anywhere to stick cars. One of the good things, maybe, is the fact that we have put those bits down Norton Road. At least there are some traffic areas down there now, which didn't used to be there. Maybe we should look at something like that instead of that. But it does mean, though, that you've got to go. We've got this thing about people just don't want to park right next to the shop that they want to shop in. They're not very happy about going down the road, parking, and then walking 10 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there.
Yeah. Sorry.
Can I make a suggestion? It is now 10:15 at night. We've managed 1 out of the 4 items. We clearly are going to have to defer issue of the design statement to another day. I don't know how many people have actually had an opportunity to read this document, which of course is produced by a professional in the sense that Mark Benz has basically worked on this document. We do need at some point to look at this and actually come to a conclusion. Clearly it can't be tonight. We could either put it on the next full town council meeting and see whether or not we get there, or we might end up doing another special meeting. But we don't need to hold up progress generally, subject to one point we'll make in 1 second. Because of this, we've basically approved that in principle. That means that we can go to Blackthorn, we can go to the other villages, and we can start planning our next moves. But in terms of that, it's people's preference to have another one-off meeting. I suspect it'll be a lot shorter than this one. Okay.
Do we need to formally propose that we've accepted it?
Which? That?
Yep.
All right. I formally propose that we accept in principle the draft that has been before us tonight, subject to the various observations and corrections already made.
I second it.
Can I make a proviso to that? That we're now taking over as well as proposing that. So in other words, we're going to be taking over the.
Can I suggest that we take that as a, rather than taking that as an amendment?
Is that a different proposal?
I'm not sure that's what you want to do.
Yeah. Can I suggest we look at that issue separately to this?
Yes.
All those in favour of accepting the draft?
Yeah.
Unanimously, good.
With the
Well, in terms of how we go forward, you'll see that item 03 was to consider whether to approve the NPS health check, and you heard what the clerk said earlier. We've now got 2 quotes, and basically they're for the same figure, and it's £3,500. Amongst the papers that you were provided with tonight, at my suggestion, was some figures on how much has this cost us to date, what's in the budget, etc., and are there grant potentials. I must admit that I took a bit of a gulp when I saw what it had already cost, because it's been spent over a period of time and you don't necessarily realise quite how much has gone into this.
But there was a grant, sorry, I didn't find out until I sent it. Sian Matthews said that, I think it was in the year when about £24,000 was spent, she helped get a grant towards that.
Oh yes, I think that
So-
some of that has been grant funded,
Yeah.
but nevertheless, the council has spent a lot of money. But the question really is this: we haven't got anything specifically on the agenda in terms of anything other than to consider whether to approve the NPS health check. Now, bearing in mind we've got 2 quotes, albeit that they're the same, and we don't mention a figure. I mean, could we actually vote on it, or do we defer that to full council on the
Well, we need it done,
16th?
to be honest. We need it
Yeah, I
done
think you
quick.
can vote on it.
We could
because,
vote on it
yeah,
tonight.
You've been given the figures in the open meeting.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me, having taken the thing this far, we need this expert guidance, because if there are things in here which an expert tells us you just can't have in that format, we need to know, and we need to know it now. And if that's what it's going to take, I'm afraid that's what it's going to take.
Has to
So,
be belt and braces before it goes
sadly,
to the public,
can I
of course.
propose that we do that?
Propose it if you don't wish to.
Well, I'll take it that Councillor Oates seconded what I proposed. All those in favour of getting on with it?
I don't like it, but we've come so far.
Fine, so we'll get on with that.
Do you want the design statement doing as well?
Because we're doing the 2 documents, in a sense, they are
Yeah, linked.
linked. I don't see how we cannot do it. So I think we have to get that looked at as well.
But then any amendments we make will have to be looked at as well, won't they?
Well, we'll have to make sure that they're not incompatible, but it's a slightly different exercise to this one, and therefore a much more discreet piece of work, if there were to be any.
Do you know the
Real
list of the
changes.
little, like the grammar mistakes? Do you want those changing before it goes, or do you want it to go as it is?
I think, I could, if it's easy to make those changes, fine. If not, you could either send it with that and just say, look, we've done that bit. But the main thing is the sort of, are the policies such that we are going to be able to be okay? That's what my main concern is. So I'm less worried about it. You could even in the covering letter say, look, we appreciate there are some typographical errors, etc. They've been gone through. We think we've picked them all up. You don't need to worry about things like that. Is this going to fall down on planning grounds? Now, the other, they could potentially do that. Yeah. It also talks about whether or not to continue to use the consultant services to progress the neighbourhood plan. And you'll recall that we've mentioned sort of bouncing a few things off James Wilson. What maybe might make more sense, though, would be not... We're in danger of paying for the same advice twice to a degree if we go to both him and MP, as it seems to me. I know that what we're asking may be slightly different, but I'm tempted to say, well, let's do the MPs thing and see where we are, and if we then want to raise certain things with James Wilson, we can. So can we, in a sense, just put that on the back burner?
You bring up points that you need him to answer.
So, that leaves only this, which in a sense is where to next with the main thing. We've said we're going to disseminate this to the other parishes and say, look, it's a work in progress, but you ought to see this. I believe that what we have to do is do something relatively similar to what they did in Clapthorne, in that there should be an event to show people what has emerged this far. It's not the formal consultation process yet, but it's an opportunity for us, plus our partner developers, to go out there and show things. We also have the benefit that people can then see, visualise things like the Millersfield development and how it looks, which may come over better than it does here. There's clearly a bit of work to be done to put that together, and that's probably something that can be done by planning committee or a bit of it, working with marketing to sort of come up with the form of the event. I think it's the last bit of the engagement process that we would arguably need to demonstrate, that we show that the developers have had an opportunity to show to people what it is that they have put forward that has been incorporated into the plan. We can say a few things about the rationale, about how we got there. We can invite a certain amount of feedback, but what I hope we don't end up with is sort of somebody thinking that they want to vote down X or Y or Z, but to some extent we'll just have to see what happens. Thereafter, we just set in train the formal process, which takes us through the formal Reg 14 consultation and the remaining steps up to the independent examiner looking at it. And as and when and if we get to the stage of that saying, yes, we are at referendum. A phrase I didn't think I'd necessarily be saying, but, you know, I think, and I hope I'm not counting my chickens too soon, but I think we really can see the light at the end of the tunnel now. I think it is deliverable within this year, unless NPers come back and tell us we've got a lot of rethinking to do, because we haven't made any significant changes to the thrust of this document, and that I think was important.
I think, if you don't mind, we have to do an additional special oral, which is probably
Well, it can promote the event as well.
Yes, and I think in there, we do need to, this is one of those things where you have to spend a bit of money to get what you want. And so this oracle has to have very good graphics, a pictorial view. I think people, the document, you know, you could do a couple of statements, but effectively it's got to be very picture rich, and we can get stuff off the developers presumably to help, I think. But it's got to be something that shouts out the benefits.
Are you suggesting we use a professional
Yes.
firm to do the design rather than
Yes.
do it
I
ourselves?
think this is something you can't do yourself. This is we've spent £50,000 so far.
Yeah.
It could fail on our miscommunication.
I
think
think,
it's-
you've got to do it. I
thanks
think
for that.
it's
You have to-
professional.
you have to
The
do that.
presentation is professional and not hidden in the basement at 7:30.
Right. I'm going to make one closing point, and it's this. An awful lot of work was carried out by the group led by Councillor Stern, which essentially comprised Councillor Stern, former Town Councillor Fraser, Mark Benz, Mark Fulton and Richard Tremellian. I don't think we should let this evening go without indicating to them our thanks for all the effort and work that they've put into it. I think that needs to be recorded, but I think we also need to perhaps write a letter to Councillor Stern to communicate that. However, I also take on board the sentiment expressed by Councillor Humphreys earlier, and it's been my view for some time. Their role has perhaps now
Moved on.
receded, as it were, to perhaps being somebody to whom we could turn for certain advice about aspects of the matter if we think that it's helpful. But this now has to be driven forward by this town council, and I'm not sure that there isn't an ongoing role for them, but their work in getting us to this point must be recognised and must be thanked.
Yeah, good point.
No, I think we should write it, obviously write a letter. In fact, we should write individual letters to individual.
Well, I'm quite happy if we write individual letters, because there aren't that many of them, and it's going to be the same letter, so it's not going to be a huge additional burden.
I think it gives the right impression, rather than sending one letter to one person,
Yeah,
saying, look, can you say it, thank everybody else.
Yeah.
We just thank everybody, and obviously signed by the mayor.
Yeah, I take your point. Does anybody else have anything else to say? Because if not, it's 10:30. That's one of the latest finishes we've had for a while, but we have done a really good job tonight. And I'd like
I
to
am
thank you for
so
that.
excited. I was up at 4 o'clock this morning.
Thinking about this.
No.
Oh.
To be honest, I'm buzzing. Because at one point I was losing it, but I'm actually buzzing because we've done something major today. And well done to everybody. And thank you, David.
Actually, I was about to bang the gavel, but it's your meeting, so you can bang the gavel. I know I've done all the talking.